My dad bought a 3-bedroom house in 1994 for $87,000. That same house today, $540,000. His salary back then, $38,000 a year. The average salary today in America, $59,000 a year. Do that math. His house cost him 2.3 times his annual income. That same house now costs a regular person 9 times their annual income. That's not inflation. That's not the market. That is a system that was deliberately rebuilt, brick by brick, to make sure certain people could never own property. And here's what nobody's telling you. It's not billionaires buying up all the houses. It's actually worse than that. Stay with me. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly 3 things. Who actually broke the housing market, why the standard fixes being proposed won't work, and this is the part that makes people angry. Why some very powerful people have a direct financial interest in keeping you a renter for life. Every politician you've ever heard discuss housing says the same thing. We need to build more homes. Supply and demand. Basic economics. Sounds reasonable, right? Here's the problem. Between 2012 and 2022, the United States built roughly 9 million new homes. During that same period, home prices went up by 70%. Read that again. More supply, higher prices. That's not how supply and demand is supposed to work. So what actually happened? In 2010, after the financial crisis wiped out millions of homeowners, a company called Blackstone started buying single-family homes at foreclosure auctions. Not 1 or 2, tens of thousands. By 2013, they were spending $150 million a week buying houses. Invitation Homes, which Blackstone created, now owns roughly 80,000 single-family homes across America. American Homes 4, Rent owns another 58,000. These aren't apartment buildings. These are the exact same 3-bedroom suburban houses that your parents bought to raise families. But here's what I want you to understand. Institutional investors own somewhere between 3% and 5% of the single-family market, so they're not the whole story. They're a symptom. The real disease is something called zoning. In 1970, Minneapolis, Minnesota had a population of about 434,000 people. By 2018, nearly 50 years later, the population was still just 422,000. Basically flat. Was Minneapolis so undesirable that nobody wanted to live there for half a century? No. Minneapolis had something called single-family zoning, covering roughly 70% of its residential land. You could not legally build an apartment building on most of the city. You could not build a duplex. You could only build one house on one lot for one family. In 2040, Minneapolis abolished single-family zoning entirely. They allowed 3-unit buildings on any residential lot. Rent increases in Minneapolis slowed dramatically compared to peer cities. According to data from the Minneapolis Fed, by 2023, Minneapolis was one of the few major American cities where rents actually fell. Now ask yourself, why hasn't your city done this? Because the people who already own homes in those neighborhoods, people who bought in the 80s and 90s at a fraction of today's prices, vote against it. Every single time. They go to city council meetings, they call their council members, they file environmental objections. They do everything legally possible to prevent new housing from being built near them. There's a name for this, NIMBYism. Not in my backyard. And the brutal truth is that it's economically rational. If you bought your house for $200,000 and it's now worth $700,000, any new housing built nearby threatens that gain. Your retirement fund is your home's value. Of course you're going to fight new construction. This is the real villain of the housing crisis, and it doesn't have a face. It's just millions of homeowners, each individually acting in their own interest, collectively strangling supply for everyone who came after them. There's another layer that doesn't get talked about enough. In 2020 and 2021, mortgage rates dropped to historic lows. We're talking 2.7%, 2.8%. People rushed to lock those rates in. Millions of homeowners refinanced. Makes total sense. Then in 2022, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates to fight inflation. Mortgage rates shot above 7%. Here's what that created, a locked market. Say you bought your house in 2021 at a 3% rate. Your monthly payment on a $400,000 mortgage is about $1,686. If you sell and try to buy another $400,000 home today at 7%, that same payment becomes $2,661. you'd be paying nearly $1,000 more a month for the exact same house. So people aren't selling, they're staying put. Supply dries up even further. Prices don't drop because sellers won't sell at a loss when they can just rent out their property instead. This is what economists call the lock-in effect. Goldman Sachs estimated in 2023 that it has removed roughly 4 million homes from the active market. Homes that exist, that people live in, completely frozen. The market isn't broken by accident. It's frozen by a cascade of rational individual decisions that collectively produce an irrational outcome for society. Here's where I'm going to say something that might make you uncomfortable. You've probably heard that renting is throwing money away, that buying a home is the smartest financial move you'll ever make, that home ownership is the foundation of the middle class. I want to argue that this belief, this cultural obsession with home ownership, is a major reason housing's broken. When housing is treated as an investment, prices going up is good. Rising prices mean wealth. Politicians get elected on rising home prices. The Federal Reserve watches homeowner equity as a sign of economic health. But housing is shelter first. When the price of shelter goes up, people who don't own it get crushed. Germany has a home ownership rate of about 46%, one of the lowest in the developed world. Switzerland's is 36%. These countries are not financial disasters. Their citizens are not throwing money away. They built robust tenant protections, long-term rental contracts, and a culture where renting is not a failure. And housing in their major cities, while not cheap, never became the predatory speculation engine it became in the US, UK, and Canada. The countries with the worst housing crises, the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, all share one thing: a deep cultural belief that rising home prices are a sign of national health, rather than a tax on the next generation. We turned shelter into a stock, and now we're surprised that people can't afford to live. So can this be fixed? Honestly? Not fast, not easily. Minneapolis showed that upzoning works, but it took political will that most cities won't find. Japan, specifically Tokyo, is the most interesting example. Tokyo added 1.2 million housing units between 2013 and 2023. Tokyo's rents have barely risen in 2 decades, while every comparable global city saw rents double or triple. They did it by stripping zoning power from local governments and setting it at the national level. No NIMBY veto, but the US is not Japan. The political incentives are almost perfectly aligned to prevent any real solution. Older homeowners have more political power than young renters. Institutional investors lobby against regulation. Local governments depend on property tax revenue that only grows if prices grow. Here's what I actually believe: the housing crisis will not be solved by the people who benefit from it. The only thing that changes this is young people, people who don't own, who won't inherit, who are being priced out of cities their parents bought into casually, deciding that this is the issue worth fighting on. Until then, the house your parents told you to buy, the bank probably owns most of it. The investor pool might own the one next to it, and the zoning board made sure you can't build a cheaper one. That's not bad luck. That's a system.